You know that feeling when everything changes in one quiet moment? That's exactly what happened to them. The office was super quiet that evening. The kind of quiet that made Marcus feel restless. He was used to hearing computers humming, people talking, and laughter in the hallways. But today was different. Most people had left early. Only a few lights were on in the distance. Marcus was finishing his reports. He kept looking at the clock. It was almost time to go home. But something about the empty office felt heavy, like something was about to happen. He just didn't know what. Meanwhile, Sophie was standing near the entrance. She was holding her bag strap really tight. She had stayed late to finish her work too. Her mind kept jumping between work deadlines and personal stuff. Rain had started pouring outside. She didn't expect it at all. The raindrops hit the big glass windows like drums. It made the office feel colder than it really was. She stared out at the dark, wet street. She knew she had to go out into that storm to get home. Marcus noticed her from across the room. Something about the way she stood there caught his attention. Her shoulders were shaking a little as she looked at the rain. He had always thought Sophie was quiet and calm, someone who handled everything gracefully. But tonight she looked small, almost fragile. He felt something pull at him, a sudden need to do something, anything to make sure she was okay. "Hey," he called out. His voice cut through the silence. She turned her head. She was surprised to hear him. "Do you need a ride?" There was only concern in his voice, no hesitation. But Sophie paused anyway. She wasn't used to people offering help so directly. Especially him. "I don't want to trouble you," she said quietly. Her words had that polite hesitation she always used around others. Marcus walked closer. He shook his head with a gentle smile. "It's no trouble at all," he said. His smile wasn't just polite. It was warm. Sincere. The kind of smile that makes you feel noticed in a way you rarely do. There was a quiet moment between them, the kind that made both of them suddenly aware of how close they were standing. Outside, the rain pounded harder. The street lights reflected off the wet pavement. Sophie looked down at her shoes. She wasn't sure what to say. Then she looked up at Marcus. Silently weighing her options. He waited patiently. He didn't rush her. He didn't pressure her. The tension wasn't heavy. It was soft, almost like a breath held too long. Finally, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. Marcus's heart skipped slightly, though he tried to hide it. He grabbed his keys and gestured for her to follow him to the car. The walk outside was brief, but it was soaked in rain and quiet anticipation. Sophie adjusted her bag on her shoulder. She glanced at Marcus as they moved. He noticed her nervous glance. He gave her a small, reassuring nod. As if to say, "You're not alone." When they reached his car, the rain was falling even harder. Sophie paused at the door. Marcus opened it for her, a gesture so simple yet so thoughtful. It made her heart flutter unexpectedly. She stepped inside, shaking off some of the wetness from her coat. She sat quietly, staring out the window. Marcus closed the door and started the engine. The soft sound of the wipers kept rhythm with the rain. Neither spoke at first. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was almost comforting, a shared space where neither had to explain themselves, yet they still felt connected. Marcus kept his eyes on the road, but he could sense Sophie's gaze on him. She seemed to be measuring him, trying to figure out if this offer of help was real or just polite. It was real. And he wanted her to know it without forcing the words. "Are you okay?" he finally asked, breaking the silence gently. Sophie nodded. Her eyes still fixed on the rainy street. "It's just been a long week," she admitted. Her voice quiet but honest. Marcus didn't press for details. He simply replied, "I'm glad you're not alone in it." The words were simple, but they carried more meaning than either of them expected. Sophie turned her head toward him, her eyes reflecting the dim street lights outside. "You always make things feel steady," she whispered. Marcus's fingers tightened slightly on their steering wheel. He wasn't used to compliments from her, and the way she said it made something inside him stir. He wanted to tell her he felt the same way, but he did in single quotes. Not yet. The ride continued. Quiet, but heavy with a new understanding. Neither of them fully recognized it yet. By the time they reached her apartment building, the rain had eased to a gentle drizzle. Sophie stayed in the car for a moment, letting the warmth of the interior settle around her, and the lingering comfort of Marcus's presence. Marcus, thank you, she said softly, almost to herself. He nodded. The words he wanted to say were trapped behind the careful restraint of his calm exterior. There was no grand gesture. No dramatic declaration. Just a quiet recognition that something had shifted, something subtle but undeniable. They both felt it, though neither could name it yet. When Sophie stepped out of the car and turned to wave, Marcus watched her disappear into the building. His heart felt lighter, yet somehow restless, as if he had just crossed an invisible line. That night, as he drove home in silence, he replayed every glance, every pause. Every word exchanged. He didn't realize it yet, but this small rainy night would mark the beginning of something new. A closeness between them, a connection that would slowly grow into something neither of them could ignore. And that was the moment everything quietly began to change. The drive was quiet at first. The kind of silence that felt heavy, but not uncomfortable. Rain streaked down the windshield in long, slow lines. The sound of the wipers keeping rhythm made the car feel like a small, separate world. Sophie stared out the window, watching the wet streets blur into streaks of orange and white light. She didn't notice at first that Marcus was glancing at her from time to time, his hand steady on the wheel. His posture calm, but attentive. You okay? He asked after a few minutes, his voice soft and careful. She turned slightly, startled by the sudden break in the silence. She nodded, hesitating before she spoke. I'm fine. It's just been a long week. Her words hung between them. Simple, almost casual. But Marcus sensed the weight behind them. There was no need to ask for details. He didn't want to push. He simply said, I'm glad you're not alone in it. The words were small, but they carried a warmth that made her heart tighten slightly. She looked at him, then really looked, and saw something in his expression she hadn't noticed before. There was a quiet care in his eyes, steady and reassuring. For the first time, she felt like someone understood her, without needing to know every detail. Someone who simply recognized her exhaustion and accepted it. The car moved through the rain-slicked streets, the soft glow of street lights reflecting on puddles. Sophie's thoughts were scattered, about work, about her small apartment, about the loneliness she often felt even in a room full of people. But something about Marcus's presence made those worries feel lighter, more manageable. She turned toward him again, hesitant but curious. You always make things feel steady, she whispered. Almost as if she were afraid to speak too loudly. Marcus's chest tightened slightly. He wasn't used to hearing such words, and the gentle tone in which she spoke them left him both surprised and flustered. In a way he hadn't expected, he didn't answer immediately. Instead, he focused on the road, letting the quiet between them stretch for a few more moments. There was something delicate about this connection forming, fragile and new, and he didn't want to rush it. The city passed around them, lights blurring with the rain, creating a world that seemed almost dreamlike. Sophie felt a strange mix of comfort and anticipation every time she glanced at Marcus. She saw a kindness in his face that made her chest ache softly, the kind of ache that comes from realizing you care about someone more than you expected. She didn't reach for his hand, didn't lean closer, but the warmth of being near him was enough. After a while, Marcus broke the silence again, this time with a small, casual question. Do you want to listen to music? He reached over and turned the dial, filling the car with soft instrumental tracks that blended with the rain. The music was quiet, soothing, not demanding attention. Yet it seemed to settle the space between them even more. Sophie let herself relax, feeling the tension of the week begin to melt. They drove in near silence, but the atmosphere was charged with unspoken words. Sophie realized she had been holding her breath, waiting for something she couldn't name. Marcus's calm presence, the simple offer of a ride, The quiet acknowledgement of her exhaustion thought it all added up to a comfort she rarely felt. She was used to hiding her fatigue, her worries, her quiet loneliness. But somehow, in this car, she didn't feel the need to. When they reached her apartment building, the rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle. The warm lights of the building reflected on the wet pavement. Sophie paused for a moment, not wanting the ride to end too quickly. Marcus noticed her hesitation, giving her a look that was patient but full of understanding. "You're okay," he said softly. "You can take your time." She smiled, a small, grateful smile, and stepped out of the car slowly. She held her bag close and looked at him with a quiet intensity, as if trying to convey her thanks without words. Marcus. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but steady. He nodded, trying to keep his expression neutral. But she caught the faint flicker of something warmer, deeper, more personal in his eyes. The moment felt suspended in time. There was no rush, no pressure, just people acknowledging a quiet shift in their relationship. Sophie turned toward the building entrance, taking slow steps, but she kept glancing back. Marcus stayed in the car, watching her, feeling a pull he couldn't explain. He had driven many people home, but none had left this kind of impression before. As she disappeared inside, Marcus sat for a moment longer, letting the feeling settle. There was a new energy, subtle and undeniable, lingering between them. Something had changed tonight, not dramatically, not with grand gestures, but in small, quiet ways that mattered deeply. He could feel it in the way his chest warmed when he thought of her, in the way his mind replayed every glance and pause. And Sophie, inside her apartment, felt it too. She leaned against the door, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That ride had been more than a simple gesture of kindness. It had been a bridge, an unspoken understanding, a quiet acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, someone could see her in the way she wanted to be seen. Neither of them knew how far this connection would go, or what it meant for the future. But that night, in the car, through the rain, in the simple exchange of words and quiet glances, a seed was planted. A connection, fragile and new, had begun to grow, and neither Marcus nor Sophie could ignore the gentle, undeniable pull that drew them closer, marking the beginning of something neither had expected, but both would soon come to cherish. After that rainy evening, things between Marcus and Sophie began to shift in ways neither of them could ignore. It wasn't dramatic at first. No sudden declarations. No overwhelming moments. But the small changes added up quickly, and every day seemed to bring them closer. Mornings became slightly brighter when they arrived at the office and found each other waiting for a shared coffee. Or a brief smile across the room that lasted just a heartbeat longer than before. Marcus noticed the subtle changes in Sophie first. She laughed a little more easily around him, and the soft warmth in her eyes was impossible to miss. He found himself paying attention to details he had once overlooked. The way she brushed a stray strand of hair behind her ear, or the way she carefully arranged her papers on her desk. He didn't realize it at the time, but he was waiting for her to walk into the office each day with a quiet anticipation, a feeling that had nothing to do with work and everything to do with her presence. Sophie felt the shift keenly. She caught herself thinking of Marcus at odd moments, wondering if he was smiling at something small or simply lost in thought. The thought made her heart flutter in ways that confused her. She wasn't used to feeling so openly connected to someone who had once been just a colleague. She found excuses to linger near his desk. To offer small favors, a pen when he forgot one, a mug of tea when she knew he'd been working late. Every action was subtle, yet each one built a quiet intimacy neither of them could name aloud. The co-workers around them started to notice. Of course, it was hard not to, when people who had previously kept their distance suddenly began to share small moments of connection. One morning, as they passed in the hallway, a colleague called out teasingly, "You two have been spending a lot of time together lately." Marcus and Sophie exchanged a glance. Quick and shy. Neither confirming nor denying the remark. Instead, they smiled softly, each other. An unspoken acknowledgement passing between them. There was comfort in that smile, a quiet understanding that this wasn't just coincidence. It was something deliberate. Something mutual. One chilly afternoon, as the wind rattled the office windows, Sophie surprised Marcus with a cup of hot tea, exactly the way he liked it. He looked at her, startled but pleased. "You remembered?" he asked, his voice carrying a note of gentle surprise. "Of course," she said softly, placing the cup on his desk. "I pay attention." Her words were simple, but the sincerity behind them hit him harder than he expected. There was no fanfare. No grand gesture, just a small act of care that carried enormous weight. Marcus's chest felt tight, a warmth spreading through him that he hadn't experienced before. In such a quiet, understated way. The days continued like this, a rhythm forming between them. They exchanged small jokes that no one else understood, brief smiles across crowded rooms, shared looks during meetings that said more than words ever could. The connection was quiet but undeniable, a slow building of trust and understanding. Each gesture, each glance, each conversation, no matter how small, was a thread weaving them closer together. One evening, as the office emptied and the sky outside darkened, Sophie found herself walking past Marcus's desk. She noticed him still working, focused on his computer, and something inside her urged her to stay a moment longer. "You've been at this for hours," she said softly. "You should take a break." Her voice was gentle. But it carried a concern that surprised even her. Marcus looked up at her. And for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to let down his usual composed exterior. "I don't mind staying," he admitted, "if it means talking with you." The simple words caught Sophie off guard. She felt her heart skip a beat, a rush of warmth and longing filling the space between them. The office was empty. The only sounds were the quiet hum of electronics and the distant tap of rain against the windows. But in that small space, the atmosphere was charged with something unspoken. Something deep. They didn't need to move closer. The distance between their chairs felt minimal, almost symbolic of how close they had become in spirit, even if the physical space remained intact. The quiet moments, shared glances, subtle smiles, mutual understanding had created a bond neither of them had anticipated. Sophie realized she trusted him in a way she hadn't trusted anyone in years. And Marcus felt the same. Though he kept it carefully guarded. The soft rhythm of their interaction. Small gestures, brief conversations, laughter shared in private moments, created an intimacy that didn't require words. Marcus noticed the way Sophie's eyes lit up at small successes, how she appreciated the little things, and he began to see her in a new light, beyond the professional. Beyond the surface. Sophie, in turn, saw the steadiness in Marcus, the quiet strength that made her feel safe, that made her believe that someone could care without asking for anything in return. By the time the day ended, both felt the subtle shift that had begun long ago on that rainy evening. There was a closeness now that was undeniable, a quiet intimacy that neither had spoken aloud, but both had recognized in countless small ways. As they packed their things and prepared to leave, neither of them felt the urgency to label it. To define it. They simply understood that something important had begun, something that felt natural, gentle, and inevitable. Walking out together into the cool evening air, the city lights reflecting on the wet streets, they moved in sync without realizing it. Their shoulders brushed briefly, a touch light but meaningful, and for a moment, the world seemed to shrink around them. Each step they took side by side reinforced the connection that had quietly grown between them. Connection built not on grand gestures, but on understanding, trust, and a shared recognition of something tender and real. And in that quiet, ordinary evening, with the streets glistening under the city lights, Marcus and Sophie both felt it. They had moved past casual friendliness, past polite smiles and simple conversations. They were closer now, closer in ways that mattered. In ways that promised more. Neither spoke it aloud, but both knew, after that night, after the small, meaningful gestures, something had shifted. Their hearts had begun to meet in ways neither could deny, and the bond forming between them was only beginning to grow stronger. The office was quiet that Friday evening. Almost everyone had left hours ago, leaving only Marcus and Sophie behind. Surrounded by dim lights and the soft hum of computers, there was a calmness in the air. But underneath it, something unspoken lingered between them. Neither had spoken about the closeness that had quietly formed over the past weeks. Yet both felt it. Felt the gentle pull drawing them together. Sophie walked past Marcus's desk, pausing for a moment as if debating whether to stay or leave. The building was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every small sound feel amplified, like a tapping keyboard or a shifting chair. She could see Marcus focused on his work, the soft glow of the monitor reflecting off his face, and she felt a strange mix of admiration and warmth. "You've been working nonstop," she said softly, her voice cutting through the quiet. "You should take a break." Marcus looked up, surprised to hear her voice. But something in her tone made him relax immediately. For a moment, he just studied her, noticing the way her hair fell softly over her shoulder, the faint tiredness in her eyes, and the small, caring smile she offered him. "I don't mind staying," he said quietly, "if it means talking with you." The words were simple, casual, yet they carried a weight that neither could ignore. Sophie felt her heart quicken. The room felt smaller somehow. Warmer, as if the space between them had shrunk without either moving an inch. She settled into the chair across from him, keeping just enough distance to feel comfortable, but close enough to sense the quiet energy in the room. They didn't speak for a few moments, letting the silence stretch and fill the space with anticipation. It wasn't awkward. It was meaningful, almost electric. "You know," Sophie began softly, "things feel different lately. I can't explain it exactly, but it's noticeable." Her eyes met his. And in that gaze, Marcus saw exactly what she meant. The bond that had slowly built over shared coffees, small jokes, and quiet gestures had grown into something undeniable. "Yeah," he admitted, a soft smile tugging at his lips. "I feel it too." Neither needed to say more. The room seemed to hum around them. Full of all the things they had left unsaid. But both understood. Every glance, every gentle smile in the past weeks had led to this quiet moment. There was trust now. Comfort. And the realization that their connection was more than casual friendship. It was real, tangible, and deeply felt. They talked then, but not about work. Not about deadlines or reports. Their conversation wandered through small personal things. Favorite books. Little childhood memories. Moments that made them laugh quietly to themselves. Each word, each shared memory seemed to deepen the connection further. Marcus realized how much he enjoyed hearing her voice in these private moments, how much he treasured the small ways she expressed herself. Sophie noticed the same about him, the gentle way he listened, the quiet attentiveness that made her feel seen in a way no one else had noticed before. Time seemed to slow down, stretching the evening into a space where nothing else mattered. They laughed softly at small jokes only they understood. They exchanged glances that lingered just a second too long, but neither pulled away. There was a gentle tension, a warmth that wrapped around them. Soft and steady, like a quiet promise. At one point, Sophie handed Marcus a cup of tea she had made earlier, remembering the exact way he liked it. The gesture was small, ordinary even, but it carried everything that had been building between them: attention, care, thoughtfulness. Marcus accepted it, his fingers brushing hers briefly, a small contact that made both of them inhale sharply. Neither commented on it, but the moment was significant. A quiet acknowledgement of the closeness forming. As the evening wore on, they both realized they didn't want to leave the office just yet. There was a comfort in the shared silence. In being near each other without needing words to define it. They didn't move closer physically. But their hearts were already connected, bridging the small distance between chairs, desks, and words left unsaid. Every shared laugh, every glance, every soft remark had pulled them closer, and now the bond was impossible to ignore. When Sophie finally stood to leave, she paused at the door, glancing back at Marcus. He looked up at her, his expression soft, open, and unguarded. "See you Monday?" she asked, her voice quiet, but hopeful. "Definitely," he replied, a warm smile spreading across his face. For a brief moment, time seemed to freeze. They both understood that something important had begun, something neither could define fully yet. But both felt deeply. It wasn't just friendship anymore. It wasn't even just attraction. It was something more profound. A connection that had grown slowly, carefully, and authentically. Built on trust, understanding, and the quiet recognition that they had found something rare. Something worth protecting. And as Sophie walked away, and Marcus watched her go, they both knew this was only the beginning.